So, welcome back to Third Age Reforged into another battle replay, and this was going to be the Cardland Outpost update replay. However, once again, the spectre of poor mechanical performance reared its ugly head as within the first 1000 frames a mangonel shot caused the game to crash, and I'm done with that. I can't be dealing with it. Like, I've had a day of university, I wanted to come back and do some recording, and I'm not putting up with that. I'm sorry. I can't do it. May the game have mercy on me, but I really don't want to make a return to that period where it was crashing over and over again. I really don't want to have to rant about that, because it comes off as me being a knob, really, but I can't do it. I can't do that. So, and unless stuff like that changes, again, it's new maps. New maps are the only thing that seem to cause those crashes. So it's people putting too much stuff on their maps, people making too much use of units that are mechanically very taxing on the game, especially at these settings, and it just won't work. So it's just the way it is. But the silver lining to this is we will get to see the hotfix in action, because that Cardland Outpost battle was on the regular build. This is a hotfix battle, and it's also another RP battle, as we see 3 Khandish armies on this side of the river preparing to face off against 4 Khandish armies over there against 3 Rohan armies over on this side of the river. Once again, as it is the hotfix, I think, yeah, there's a couple of units of cavalry this time around, which is interesting. We haven't seen cavalry up until this point, but to be fair, cavalry, the changes that both of these factions have gone through in the hotfix, obviously the shock infantry changes that I've already mentioned will apply to both. Khand, of course, have got some heavy swordsmen, which it will apply to, as well as the Brotherhood of the Axe and other units like that. Rohan, of course, have got plenty of heavy axemen that it's going to apply to as well. However, one of the other main changes I haven't mentioned as of yet, because it hasn't really come up, is cavalry. And for both of these two factions, especially for Lancers, I would have to say, so it probably will have more of an impact actually on Rohan than Khand, the morale of these units has been raised, especially for the lower end Lancers. So one problem that Lancers had in the previous patch was they very easily routed. It was very easy for them to rout. As soon as they charged in, generally speaking, unless they had a really high charge bonus and did a lot of damage, they would immediately start to waver, and then as soon as you started to pull them out, of course, they'd be turning their back on combat and they'd rout, which is one of the reasons why you'd barely ever see lower end Lancers, because they were almost never worth bringing. Raising the morale does mean that they will be a lot more useful now. At least that is the idea, and I very much approve of it, because it means now we'll see a little bit more on horseback than just low tier horse archers and high tier melee cavalry and lancers. Certainly high tier lancers anyway. Lower tier lancers definitely needed a little something to make them a little stronger. But this one was given to me by Prince, and he is going to be on the Khandish team today. I have to say, on a river crossing venue like this, I do think Khand maybe have the slight edge, especially if they're willing to be a little bit more patient with it, because I feel as though in the long range archer game, when you take mobility out of the equation, and obviously with horse archers, both of these two factions are really much of a muchness. They're very similar in terms of their strengths, but certainly on foot in a skirmish fight, Khand are the stronger of the two. That does change around when you get closer into melee, where stuff like the shield maidens and Medicelled Guard will start to turn that around once again. However, I'm not sure whether Khand are going to charge across the river that quickly. If they do, then it might be the other way around, but Khand definitely have the better long-range foot archer force over a long period of time. Lots of Nurad footmen. The AP is going to be useful, but primarily I think the decent armour and shields to block out what Rohan missiles are going to come their way will be even more useful, and also the shield value will apply against stuff like the shield maidens as well, so very, very useful for that reason. Nurad halberds as well are a good choice, while they are vulnerable to missiles when crossing the river. Of course, Rohan don't have a phalanx unit of their own, so if they can get into melee and get those G halberds down, they're going to be in a very healthy position moving forwards. Nomadic warriors back here and nomadic axemen, so the lower end line infantry unit and the lower end shock infantry unit, so obviously the shock infantry changes should help the nomadic axemen as well, although to be fair, lower tier shock infantry like this, alongside stuff like the Orc Maulers and Orc Fellers, because that is the tier the nomadic axemen belong to, were always pretty decent at their job anyway. Obviously, again, quite vulnerable to missiles, so we'll see how they fare when crossing the river. Marauders as well, although they're a decent hand-thrown projectile unit. Lower tier javelins, although I have seen them get more kills than stuff like the Snaga skirmishers and the Orc javelins from Mordor. A little bit more of a mob-like formation here, but they're still very vulnerable to missiles, and that will be absolutely one of the things Rohan will try to focus down. A couple of units of Variag bowmen without the armour upgrade, but they're still going to be more than sufficient to fairly comfortably skirmish with anything that Rohan have available to them. The mighty Brotherhood of the Axe will be going axe to axe with a lot of the ROHIRRIM in this battle. At least I would assume Rohan have dipped quite heavily into their heavy axemen for the damage purposes. Murad Stormguard, obviously really nice multiple HP halberdiers, albeit without the formation that halberds usually get, but to be fair, they were overpowered when they had that formation. Now they act more like beefy Fountain Guard, which of course, considering you can only have one unit of them, does make a lot of sense. And then finally we have the Brotherhood of the Spear. I think the new unit model will be implemented for the hotfix, so they'll have their new spear, which looks a little bit more like a Yari from Total War Shogun 2, albeit a little bit shorter, I would say. But yeah, very effective unit, nice shield, very good staying power in melee as well. A couple of units of Variag Bowman on the front line from Misericordia. We've got some, or Misericordi. I'm going to butcher that. Again, that sounds like a French name, and I can't pronounce French. French is hard for me. Nomadic Axemen. Obviously my accent isn't very conducive to French either. Nomadic Warriors back here. Nurad Footmen. More Nurad Halberds, and pretty much the same composition here. Brotherhood of the Axe, Brotherhood of the Spear, and Nurad Stormguard as well. So Khan very much not going for the cavalry here, but then they are the ones crossing the river, so it does make a little bit more sense. Although the odd unit of cavalry wouldn't go amiss if they did finally break through on the other side, and then they could pour across with some cav as well and start causing some chaos. Death Eater over here has got some nomadic raiders. Lower tier than the Variag Bowman, but of course cheaper as well, so they're going to do their job just fine. And they have the Variag Bowman anyway, so more of a skirmish presence for Death Eater today. Nurad Footmen, Nurad Halberds, some Nomadic Warriors. We have the Variag Warriors as well. Obviously these Heavy Swordsmen. Heavy Swordsmen I think will benefit from the changes to Shock Infantry a little bit more so than Heavy Axemen and Macemen, just because Heavy Axemen and Macemen always had AP to fall back on, something the Swordmasters didn't really. So the Variag Warriors should do slightly better than we're used to them doing in the previous patch. Brotherhood of the Shadows. It'll be interesting to see the Assassins in action as well, because now, with their stats, they're very capable of going toe-to-toe with a bodyguard unit. As long as they get their projectile volley off first, their projectile volley will be a little bit more cutting now, as it were. And also as long as the bodyguard unit is not being supported. If you can isolate a general's bodyguard unit with a unit of assassins and get a decent volley into them first, the assassins should emerge victorious, albeit the assassins will be almost completely depleted by the end of the battle as well. So they have a decent purpose now. Stormguard, Brotherhood of the Axe and Spear once again. And then finally, we have Yo Ranger 0123, who's got Nurad Footmen, lots of Nomadic Warriors. So good to see Khan dipping into their numbers a little bit. More Variag Warriors for him as well. A couple of units of Nurad Halberds. Some Nomadic Infantry, so the even heavier archer that Khan has. I think the Variag Warriors, especially when they're upgraded, are maybe a little bit more efficient than the Nomadic Infantry. Certainly they were in the previous patch anyway, not so sure on the hotfix. They're still a very fine unit, and also they are better in melee, to be fair, the Nomadic Infantry. They are very much a hybrid unit, which can be used, whereas the Variag Bowmen, while they can defend themselves in melee, they don't have the same sort of stats as the Nomadic Infantry. Raiders, Spears, and then a couple of units of Nomadic Marauders back here as well. So now, let's have a little look at the ROHIRRIM. We have Enxvitz, who's got some Eastmark Spears, which I think now are sort of, at least from what Kuro told me, I believe they're going to become just sort of more dedicated Javelin men, which I think makes a lot of sense, albeit I feel as though they should probably have their cost, if that's going to happen, to be around the same sort of thing as like something like Snaga Skirmishers, which would mean a minor cost increase from what they had in the previous patch, but of course they're going to be far more useful as pure Javelin men than they were as Spears with the Prec trait. So they're going to be here in numbers, which should be very useful for holding the line, especially if they have their new mechanics in place. Some civilians just as a meat shield. The Helm's Hammers in here, obviously a very nice AP bodyguard unit as they always were. Riddermark Archers, the Rohan Archers are going to struggle a little bit against the Khandish Skirmish Force, I think, but we shall see. Skirmish Force, I'm not Sean Connery. We've got the Medicel Guard in here as well, a very good choice in this situation, I think, because the Javelins are going to be really, really useful. Of course, in melee, they're stronger than most of what Khan has to offer. I would still worry about them against the Nurad Stormguard head on. A couple of units of Helmingas, decent in melee, but of course primarily they're going to be needed for their ranged prowess. Riddermark Spears, not the highest tier spears certainly, but they can certainly still hold the line. We have some Westmark Spears, obviously even better. Over here the Shield Mains, one of the key pillars of this Rohan defense, I think. And then some Westmark Marshals as well, which will be really useful with the damage they can do. And finally, of course, we have the Knights, which are going to perform the same job that they always did, to be fair. The Sons of Yore. The central-most army is going to be Rogue, who's got some Helmingas on the front. Some civilians once again for a meat shield. He's got some Riddermark Archers over here. Some Westmark Spearmen ready to hold the front. Some more Eastmark Spears. Riddermark Spears, similar army this certainly, although he has got some Westmark infantry as well, which Should help on the front line, a little bit more skillful. You know, just sort of standard base damage instead of armor piercing. But you don't necessarily need armor piercing against Khand. They've got some heavily armored units, but Rohan have got plenty of other AP elsewhere, such as on the Riddermark Axemen, the more basic unit of shock infantry than the Westmark Marshals over there, Medicel Guard, and also he doesn't have the Knights, but he does have the First Marshal's Bodyguard, which is not quite as good, but even so, it's still going to be devastating as long as they can get their lances down into a soft part of the enemy army. And then, finally, we have FFA Muffins, who's got some civilians, got some Eastmark Spearmen, got some Helmingas, some Riddermark Archers, pretty much the same sort of thing, of course. Helms Hammers. There's only so many things you can do with Rohan, especially when you're trying to defend with a lot of infantry, to be fair. Westmark Infantry and Spears, some Medicel Guard, and also some Shield Maidens and some Heavy Axemen and more Spears at the back. So, without further ado, let's begin. And there's no Rangers for either of these two sides, so there should not be any crashes. Also, we're on a map which is fairly simple, so the taxation on the old game engine is probably going to be just fine. Interestingly enough, I think time and time again when we've seen this map, the team that was actually on this side was the team that was defending. So it's a bit of a role reversal this time around, although it doesn't obviously make too much of a difference. There's still two main lanes you can go through on either side of these pebbles, on both, or boulders on both sides. There's this central island you can set up on, and of course, because Khand have got 4 armies, the onus is certainly going to be on them to attack, and I don't think they'll mind too much because they can still dictate the pace of the battle, I think, by using their archers. It will... I do feel as though Khand need to take it slow. They can't afford to just send in nothing to engage, I think. I think they should engage with some of their lower tier units, with like a very sparsely some quality units sent forward as well initially. But the main thing they're going to want to do from the off here, I think, is use their archers, try and wear Rohan down, because it is something Rohan can be a bit vulnerable to. Even if they do counter skirmish with stuff like the Helmingas, I don't think it's going to be too much of a concern for Khand, if I'm being honest. And also the main, obviously the Riddermark Archers are of lower tier. I don't know why my frames are disappearing on me. Don't crash on me, game. These are just units that are moving around. But yeah, Rohan's force, of course, is also substantially less armoured than their brethren from the other Western Kingdoms of Men. Sans Rudour, of course. So overall, even basic archers will net more value against a faction like Rohan than they would otherwise. Helm's Hammers are an interesting unit to have as well. I mean, we don't get to see the Helm's Hammers an awful lot. We don't get to see Rohan an awful lot, to be fair. Like I said in the last replay that involved Rohan heavily, generally their replays tend to be heavy victories or defeats one way or the other. That isn't going to be the case this time around. I'm a little bit worried by the juddering frame rate. Come on, game, don't fall apart on me now. Not after a crash already today. It's been a long day, and I don't want to have to deal with your bullshit right now. Still, Miseri Cordy is going to be moving forward first, with Death Eater over on the other side, Yo Ranger just backing him up with some archers initially as well. His army's still on the way over. I'm really glad there isn't Rangers, because this blob would almost certainly be enough to cause the game to shit itself once again. Let's see, Nurad Halberds, I mean, they definitely don't want to be leading the way across the next section of river, because they will be arrow bait from all of the Rohan archers. They'll want to get as much value as they possibly can as Khand cross the river, because in terms of sheer numbers, of course, in a 4v3 like this, Khand definitely hold the advantage, and they would be my personal favourite to win. In a river crossing between these two factions, Khand in general just, I think, have the better roster to deal with this sort of thing. Rohan, again, like, they're best at dealing their damage quickly, high risk, high reward, shock infantry, all of that sort of thing, which are better in this patch, but on a river crossing you can't really deal with the enemy quickly no matter what you do. Khand, I think, are a little bit better if the engagement goes longer, which is exactly what they're going to want to do here with the Veriag Bowmen. Nice unit to bring in this sort of situation, again, similar to stuff like the Belagir Archers and Veriag Mercenaries from the other Eastern Evil Men factions. Harad are really the only ones to not have a sort of medium archer that also has a buckler to aid in its defence. They have to make do with just pure numbers instead. Brotherhood of the Axe, though, getting a little bit close. I suppose none of the ROHIRRIM archers are super long range, which is probably good for them. Otherwise they could find themselves in a fairly substantial amount of trouble. Brotherhood of the Spear will be a good unit here as well, because they're good in an atrocious fight better armour and much better shield values than most other units. Kharn in general have got some pretty decent heavy infantry that have decent shields as well. Murad footmen, of course, spring immediately to mind. Kind of an awkward faction to fight off against Kharn. Riddermark spears are there, Helm's hammers are there, Helmingas is setting up. The calm before the storm here, most certainly. It's a large blob as Prince's army continues to cross, so they could go 2 and 2 here. Death Eater and Misericordi could move in first and be the ones to essentially be the sacrificial lambs, do enough damage to Rohan, however, that Yo Ranger and Prince in behind can then mop them up. It's going to be on Rohan here to try and pick and choose their engagements very wisely. If Kharn come forward with a lot of infantry, that's when they can charge in their axemen, try and deal a lot of damage quickly. I'm sure there will be many people that are going to be rooting for Rohan here, but I do think it's going to be an uphill battle for them just because of the kind of battle that it is. They do have that cavalry though. A couple of units of very devastating cavalry, and if Kharn do extend too far, if they push in, make a gap, and then push too far into Rohan's territory, that's when the cavalry charges could become a very significant factor, especially from the sons of Eor. Meriag Bowman taking a few pot shots here, I think. I'm very intrigued to see that the Helm's hammers are directly on the front line. Obviously multiple HP, very good armour for a ROHIRRIM unit certainly, and also a massive shield value means that it's unlikely that basic Meriag Bowmen are going to be able to do much damage to them anyway. Also the civilians are amongst them, performing their ever vital role as a bit of a meat shield. Moving ever further forwards, the Meriag Bowmen getting into position, trying to provoke a response from Rohan's archers. Of course that's the thing that Kharn certainly have in their favour. They can dictate the pace of the engagement with their superior long-range skirmishers. It's something I think Rohan are just going to have to accept as well. They're going to have to set up their lines just so. They're trying to go after the civilians and Riddermark archers, 2 of the cheaper units in the ROHIRRIM army, but it is at least eating into some of Rohan's archer strength. Rohan won't mind at all the fact that they're losing civilians, however. This was also a battle I nearly forgot about, so I suppose the crashing of Cardlan Outpost Mark II is maybe not the curse that I initially thought it was. Meanwhile, nomadic raiders over here, some Nurad footmen in and amongst them, and they're going to be firing over here into... Again, looks as though they're firing into a mix of civilians and Riddermark archers. Rohan's still not firing back at this moment in time, however, trying to hold their nerve here, which is key here. The key to this battle, I think, is going to be Rohan's decision-making and how they choose to approach this defence, because Kharn, I think the idea behind what they're going to want to do is very simple. Very simple. Put pressure on with archers as soon as you feel as though Rohan are weak enough. Move forward with a lot of infantry strength and try and break them. Rohan's infantry is better than most people give it credit for, but they're no Gondor. They aren't able to withstand the same level of punishment as their nearest allies. A unit like the Westmark Spear certainly won't hurt though. Very nice in melee, especially in formation like this, and of course with their shield wall they'll be able to withstand a decent amount of punishment from enemy archers that try to go after them. More arrows coming in. I mean, this isn't an overly long battle, to be fair. I feel as though there's going to be a bit of a preamble, but as soon as it gets going, the dominoes will start to fall, I think, and some Kharnish infantry is already crossing to put some pressure on, which I agree with. Like I said, nomadic warriors, but especially the Nurad footmen, it will mean that Rohan have to respond with some infantry, which of course will put them into the harm's way of all of the Kharnish archers. Riddermark spearmen moving backwards, obviously less heavy duty than the Westmark spearmen that are in the army alongside them. Still no response from Rohan yet, so they are clearly very keen on doing this. It is interesting to me actually that Kharn are not going after the Helmingas, they're choosing to go after the civilians and the Riddermark archers. Not expensive units, but units they're more likely to kill with a hit arrow. Which does interest me. See if that pays off for them in the long run. Helm's hammers are still taking a bit of damage, but again, they're not gonna... None of them have actually died yet. Just a few straight arrows hitting them, and of course the civilians are over here to accept some arrow fire for them. Direct fire right from the front here, the nomadic raiders. They've got a clean shot into this unit, to be fair, but in shield wall, for a Rohan unit as well, they're decently armoured and shielded. They're going to do less damage. A few of the Westmark spearmen have fallen, to be fair. but not as much as you would hope considering the amount of arrows that actually found their way into that unit, which of course is the benefit of having shield wall and pointing directly towards the unit that's firing at you. Stakes are over here, but no need for stakes in this situation. They're honestly probably more of a hazard to the Rohan cavalry if cavalry ever starts engaging around the riverbank. Civilians are ready to charge in should they be required, but so far Khan are not eager to take the plunge. Ooh, hello. Eastmark Spearman. Getting a decent volley there into centre mass. Several of those units getting back up, so not a huge amount of damage done, but again, they're very cheap javelins, like I said, so not a huge amount of damage per volley, but it's a nice blob to go into, and the sooner that you can start shaving away at Khan's manpower, the better if you're Rohan in this particular situation. Meanwhile, nomadic raiders continuing to fire directly into the front, slowly but surely peeling away at the strength of the Westmark Spearmen, but holding in formation, and again, surprisingly resilient. Again, this is not a unit of fully upgraded Gondorian Spearman we're looking at here. This is a unit which will be a little bit more vulnerable to this kind of attack, but the formation does help, the shields greatly help, and I think this is probably a good demonstration of how significant shields can really be in having them pointing in the right direction. You see civilians now getting in front again, performing their role as a meat shield, this time for the Westmark Spears instead of the Helm's Hammers. And while over on the other side, much less movement, but still some Variag Bowmen coming forward. Khan, maybe a little bit frustrated at this point. They haven't been able to coax Rohan into using more of their resources than they already have, but Khan have lost very little, whereas Rohan have accrued a few losses already. So it's not all doom and gloom. Westmark Spearmen charging in. In come the civilians from Rogue. Helm's Hammers are also moving in, and with Helm's Hammers on the front line, this would go very poorly for Khan. If it's just Westmark Spears, they will win. The additional AP from the footmen and the numbers from the nomadic infantry is not something a single unit of already slightly damaged Westmark Spears are going to be able to withstand. But the Helm's Hammers are here. They need to be careful though, because if they engage in such a way, the Khandish archers will be able to bypass their shields. But yeah, with the Helm's Hammers over here, you can see already, unsupported, the Khandish infantry is starting to waver. Their resolve is questionable. Is that 2 units of... It is, it's 2 units of Helm's Hammers, so... Yeah, this Khandish infantry without any sort of support is really going to start to struggle. Variag Bowmen moving forward, a lot of archers trying to pour their fire in here, but still Rohan will not be baited. Although they're going to need to also think about sending over some support over here, because just a single unit of Westmark Spears. This unit of Variag Bowmen has gone far too far forward, so they're very lucky actually that... Well, Misericordi is quite fortunate that he managed to catch that before the Westmark Spears engaged him in melee, because, like I said, one of the best tools Khan has in this situation is being able to dictate the pace of the fight with their archers in a way that Rohan can't, at least early on here. This unit of Variag Bowmen's out of ammunition, I think the one that was firing initially. Now they've managed to catch the Westmark Spearmen moving back to their defensive position. Civilians, however, are going to screen that retreat. So the Nomads not going to make too much in the way of progress, I don't think. It's over here. Significant assault. And actually Khan, you can see that horseshoe-shaped engagement. You always want to be on the outside of the horseshoe. And Khan they are still going to lose the fight ultimately because it includes Helm's Hammers, but any additional bit of damage you can do is really appreciated by your allies, I'm sure. The problem is these nomadic raiders, they are scoring hits on the Rohan infantry. They're also getting some friendly fire as well though, and considering it's only friendly nomadic raiders that are in melee, can't imagine they're going to stick around too long here. Helm's Hammers are just one of the easiest units they could hope to be up against here. Rohan's heaviest unit of infantry. Again, I always approve when someone commits forward quality units early because it shows they mean business. And that's exactly what Rohan have done here. All of the Helm's Hammers are involved right from the off. Nomadic warriors came forward to help the Variag Bowmen, but now the defensive line is here. To be fair though, there are gaps here that Khan, if they were really aggressive here, could take advantage of. And Prince could do so here with a lot of nomadic axemen, but now the Rohan archers are activated. Riddermark archers, both of them, firing in. Definitely a very good move here. The nomadic axemen may not be the most expensive unit, but they're so weak to arrow fire that you're going to get a lot of kills, even with a unit like Riddermark archers. So it's going to be quite punishing for them. They need to get in melee as quickly as possible so they're behind other units. Because in melee, the additional damage those axes provide will be useful. Some Riddermark spearmen coming forward to try and help the front line a little bit. The Helm's Hammers cycling out now that some AP troops are on the front line, and some spears picking up the slack while the archers try to do the damage. Helm's Hammers now pulling back once again. Khan, are they going to try and run through? They are trying to run through. That's questionable. This unit of Helm's Hammers has taken a lot of damage, however. Focused archer fire does seem to have taken a bit of a toll, and all of a sudden Khan do seem to be gaining ground. The problem I would say here on this side of things is there isn't a lot of reinforcements coming forward from Khan. There isn't a lot of infantry ready to keep moving forward. Like, this unit of nomadic warriors should already be on the way across the river, I think, because they're gaining ground, and the sooner they can pour across into the land on the other side and get out of these choke points, the more they can use this huge army they have back here. They're going to do so on the other side, and they're going to send forward some quality now in the Narad Storm Guard. I feel as though they should be thinking about doing that on this side as well. Just some Brotherhood of the Spear, I would say, because obviously quality units are going to attract the attention of the Rohan archers, but the Brotherhood of the Spear have got a massive shield, so they will definitely feel confident about that. Once again, Khan find themselves on the outside of the horseshoe, which is exactly where you want to be. Nomadic Axemen are getting hit by all of these archers once again, but before they fall, they will do slightly more damage considering the shape of the engagement, which is bad news for Rohan. Efficiency is what Rohan need here, and Khan have got far more lives that they can throw away here than Rohan. So definitely not the engagement they wanted, I don't think. At least not early on. But of course, Rohan, their destiny will be shaped by individual units here. Stuff like the Shield Maidens, stuff like their cavalry, which is on display again. Maybe not the best example of the changes that Rohan's cavalry and lancers in general may have undergone here, because these two units were very effective anyway. The 1st Marshal's Bodyguard and the Sons of Yor. It's more stuff like the Riddermark cavalry that can expect to see the best increase in effectiveness from the hotfix. Westmark Spearmen, pretty depleted at this point in time. Yeah, they don't want to get too far into the river here. When they turn their back, that's exactly when the Variag Bowmen should be shooting into these infantrymen, because of course that's when the shield is not in effect, and they'll be able to do some decent damage over here. More is needed over here though. I think Rohan, they're for the taking over on this side, more so than they are over here. Rohan have got a few more units ready to hold the line over here, including some Riddermark Spearmen, some Westmark Spearmen are still on the front line. The problem is there we go. Narad Storm Guard came forward. I was just about to say, with them heading across the river, Rohan need to respond in kind, and the Shield Maidens are going to do huge damage to them, in addition to all the arrows that are coming forward. That's a lot of damage that's going in from the Shield Maidens, and of course, without a shield, the Narad Storm Guard, even with multiple HP, are going to be very vulnerable to that. Of course, shields do work against the Shield Maidens, because of course they're axe throwers. Against javelins, they don't. Javelins and crossbows, shields not useful. Archers and axe throwers, shields useful. That's the way to think of this. Still very little in the way of Khandish infantry, and I do think Rohan have enough on station now that they can stop a lightning strike from Khan. And yeah, these nomadic warriors, of course, even with the Helm's Hammers depleted and the Westmark Spears, a very depleted unit of nomadic warriors is not going to be sufficient to break Rohan's resolve on this front line at this moment in time. Certainly not. Variag Bowmen firing in. Nomadic warriors now moving forward, so more and more Khandish soldiers trying to get through over here, but the Shield Maidens have done the business already. You can see there are still Storm Guard over here, but they've had their numbers cut in half, and the rest of the Rohan infantry still holding on. Riddermark Spears and Westmark Spears fighting hard on the front line. Civilians are routing. Riddermark Spears are shaken, but with Helm's Hammers arriving on the front line, the morale should stabilise, but more and more Khandish forces are heading across the river, so I mean, Rohan's men may start to lose heart, but you can see now, obviously, now the engagements have started in earnest. Rohan's caution early on should be rewarded, because they'll have a little bit more ammunition to play with in trying to break up these Khandish waves of assault. Another wave needs to come across over here. Nomadic warriors are making their way across now. Just 2 units of nomadic warriors. I'm a little bit surprised to not see something maybe a little bit more serious over here. Like I said, I think a unit of Brotherhood of the Spear would be really good over on this thing. Put it into shield wall, and then you'll have an attack which will keep going for an awfully long time, as long as you continue to stoke the flames of it. Rohan still have a lot of units. Again, my concern here could be that Rohan have spread their army out a lot, which does of course mean they can't be focused down by archers quite so much. There's still Yo Ranger's army all the way on the other side of the river as well, so Rohan are by no means close to the end of this fight. Westmark infantry getting ready to move in as well. They'll be a very useful unit to have on the front line. And you can see here that they are starting to try and filter around the sides here, and they may have left it a little bit too late there. Like their line was struggling, and I feel as though they should have been committed a little bit sooner there from FFA Muffins. And this is the problem, like with so many units a little bit further back, it's going to take a little while to reinforce these positions, and Rohan, I don't think they appreciate how bad for them it would be to lose these 2 choke points. They don't have the numbers to try and meet Khan on the open field, as it were. Even with those 2 units of Lance Cavalry, high-end Lance Cavalry, including Knights, Khan have got the ability to deal with that, I think. They've got Javelins, which if the entirety of the Khandish armies pour across, the Javelins will be one of the last things to make their way across, I think, because the archers are still here. But also, they've got Brotherhood of the Spear, they've got Nurad Halberds, all the business. Variag warriors coming forward. That's a little bit more like it, to be fair. They may not be the best heavy swordsmen, but the heavy swordsmen are a little bit better in the hotfix. So we might see them do a little bit better against Rohan as well. And AP is not as important against Rohan, let's not forget. So having higher base damage might be preferable to having an axe unit of similar price. We shall see. In come the Nomadic Warriors. In come the Variag Warriors. I really like the Variag's armor upgrade as well, very Mongolian. But here we can see it's more sort of just the standard chain, which I appreciate as well. Yeah, and at this point Rohan needs to start thinking about really trying to send reinforcements to these front lines, because Khan is serious. They're sending forward numbers consistently, and to be fair, this could backfire on Khan. If Khan don't make any really genuine progress soon, they may regret sending this many troops across the river with all of these arrows coming their way, but I feel as though the onus is on Rohan here to try and prevent this, because if things stay as they are, Khan will find a way through. You can see here the Nomadic Warriors and the Variag Warriors together. Westmark Spears and Helm's Hammers already so depleted at this stage that just through sheer numbers, Khan are going to be able to get the result they want. Westmark Infantry are here. They're going to charge in. Shield Maidens, having used up their ammunition presumably, well, they used that very nicely. They're now going to charge in. They still have their morale buffing effect, I think, so that should help this Rohan line fight for a little bit longer. Honestly, they're not that good in melee. Like, they're decent at staying alive in the same way that line infantry are, but they're not that damaging, to be honest with you. So in melee, they won't be the heroes that are needed. Forward comes some Riddermark archers, might be out of ammunition. Eastmark spearmen coming in. Helmingas firing away. Decent in melee, and they will be pressed into service in melee at some point. But for the time being, they really need to do some damage with their arrows, and of course Khan is trying to make that as difficult as possible by shaving away at this manpower that Rohan still have. Eastmark spears taking damage. Nomadic warriors heading forwards. Still the Variag bowmen fire away. Nomadic infantry are now in position as well. Very difficult unit to skirmish with, like I said. Even more heavily armoured than the Variag warriors. Similar shield value. Their shields may be bigger, but they do wear them on the back, so it works out to being rather the same. Those Mongolian-style recurve bows firing into the very basic Rohan foot archers over here. Riddermark archers doing their best to do some damage, but of course not very expensive, which of course doesn't cut into your budget all that much, but Riddermark archers are not match winners by any means. And indeed, Rohan don't really have match winners when it comes to their foot archers. Neither do Khan, but Khan a little bit more well suited for an engagement like this, and you can see Rohan's lines starting to buckle a little bit. Variag bowmen able to get in behind enemy lines, stop the Eastmark spearmen from firing, and this is dangerous. Fortunately for Rohan, they do manage to break the Variag bowmen. In come the Riddermark spearmen advancing to do so, but this is a dangerous situation because the fact that Khan are starting to do this means the Rohan lines are not secure enough. And this could be the beginning of the end here. If Khan can keep this momentum going, if they can keep feeding these assaults, I feel as though they win this fight, to be honest. Rohan still have a lot left to give, but I just feel as though Rohan's resolve will break before Khan's in this situation. I'm going to stick by my original prediction for this battle, I think, as all of the Khandish flags come forward. Yet more nomadic units, so still just more of the lower end Khandish units ready to come forward, including the Axemen, which we can see in the thick of things over here. Warriors. It's going to take more than Eastmark spears in melee to stabilise the situation. There are Westmark infantrymen, but again the line is too thin for Rohan here. They're just being overrun. This is a little bit more like it though. Thickening up the line with some Westmark marshals, a very high damage unit of Axemen. They should be able to do some damage very, very quickly. But of course it's a dangerous situation now because Rohan have used up quite a lot of their arrows, and now Khan can start to send forward their Nurad halberds. Do Rohan have the answer to that? Well, they still have some shield maidens. They still have Medicel guard. They still have the Eastmark spears, another javelin unit. They're going to have to charge in, however, to stop the nomadic raiders from getting a good position over on this side of the river. a battle of two very lower tier units in melee. Rohan at least have a very slight hill advantage, but I don't think that's going to be too much. I mean, the Helm's Hammers are still fighting hard on the front line. It goes to show how resilient they are. The fact that they've taken damage and they're still standing, still making life difficult for Khan. Over here, a little bit more hesitant, I have to say, from Yo Ranger and Death Eater. Misericordi and Prince over on this side have been very eager to continue firing forwards. Although I would say that over on this side they found gaps a little bit more readily, been a little bit more active once they've gotten over this side of the river than Prince and Misericordi, who have just sort of charged forward and hoped to batter through the very centre, which, to be fair, they've kind of managed at this point. Eastmark Scouts, a unit of cavalry which can hide, so this is actually a unit for which the new morale buff should come into effect, although this isn't really the best use of them, to be honest with you. They're a very fragile unit of cavalry as it is. This could be enough to cause a morale shock among the Variag Bowmen, which once again have managed to find themselves a way through. Nice morale damage there. Riddermark Archers out of ammunition, so they're going to be committed to melee just for more fodder, to be honest with you. They're going to be here. Helmingast trying to do damage, but that is a large force coming forward from Khan. There's a lot of routing on the front line from Khan, though. A lot of the basic units are routing, but with the arrival of the Halberds, I would still be concerned for Rohan. Not the sort of unit they want to be seeing at all, but they still have Helmingast. The Shield Maidens are coming in, and with a blob that size, the Shield Maidens are going to be necessary to start doing some really genuine damage to it. And to be fair, I mean, Khan have pretty much emptied the central island at this point. They have come forward in a massive, massive way. There's just under 10k frames left to go as well, so we may actually be in the... This is the portion of the battle, I think, which is going to be most telling. Rohan is starting to use fire arrows, so clearly the way they're going to try and deal with this is by routing the enemy army off, and the lower tier units are, to be fair. They're also getting around the side, so at this point, Khan to push forward enough to the point where they are now on the inside of the horseshoe. And worse for them, from one side they're going to be taking axe fire from the Shield Maidens of Rohan, from the other side they're going to be in melee with Westmark Marshals, which is not great for them. More units coming forward, more Nurads, a lot more Variags. Huge blob of units. I mean, still these depleted units of Riddermark Archers doing their best trying to chip in with what damage they can. Helmingast are still firing away. There's more Helmingast back there. Rohan brought a lot of archers, to be fair, which in this sort of situation is good. In an RP, you may not have the luxury of having an ideally suited army, but in this situation they had, I think, enough. Ooh, dear. I've had one bad crashing experience today already. I don't want another one, and even without rangers, this might be enough. Eastmark Spears. Trying to go after the Nurad Stormguard again. Not the most damaging unit of javelins, but in this situation they should still be able to do a decent job. They're poor in melee, but every man is going to be needed to try and hold the lines at this point. Westmark Marshals defeat seems certain. This is the problem. Like Rohan, I just don't think they have the numbers. Their line is starting to waver as well. Like Khan are going to be taking horrendous losses as they do this, but they have the manpower to absorb a lot of casualties. Rohan don't, and that could be the difference here, because I think Rohan, the way they've set their lines up, when it's sort of quite a simple battle like this, where you only have to focus on a few things, it's a little bit easier to do this, but I still feel as though Rohan have constructed their lines decently well. Early on they did find themselves on the inside of the horseshoe-shaped engagement, which is not what you want. But other than that, I think Rohan have done very well. They did a very good job at conserving their archer ammunition, in spite of the baits that Khan left for them. Again, not really sure what Muffins is doing here. Is there units in there? There is. There's some Nurad footmen, actually, getting in behind, so I can see exactly what he's doing. He's trying to rout them off with a charge, which is absolutely necessary, because obviously Khan is starting to heap pressure on this section of the line now as well. Eastmark Spears, more cheap javelins coming in. And at this point, I think we kind of need to look from on high, to be honest with you. Not just out of necessity because of a fear of a crash, but because at this point, either one of these two choke points could be the one that falls first. This one over here has got less men on it from both sides, but it also looks as though it's the one where Khan are actually making more progress, because Rohan have committed more over here, certainly. The Medicel Guard firing their javelins into that blob, more routing from the lower end nomadic units from Khan. However, like I said, Brotherhood of the Spear have moved forward, found a gap, they're getting into the Eastmark Spears, preventing more javelins from finding their marks in the Khandish ranks. More Helmingast are firing, these Eastmark Scouts doing their thing. And you can see, I think, actually, we're seeing the morale buff in effects. I think they probably would have already routed in the last patch, to be honest with you. They've been charging in, they've been taking a few losses as well, so I think they would have routed. But as they are, they've stayed in the fight. This is worrying, though. Now Khan is starting to spill around over on this side as well. Helmingast that still had a bit of ammunition. Not going to be able to use it, though, because Nurad Footmen and Brotherhood of the Spear are going to be engaging them in melee. Not a fight that the Helmingast are going to win, unfortunately, for them. In comes the cavalry, but once again, not really the most well-executed charge. Rohan's cavalry has been charging primarily into the backs of their own men, more so than anything else. Now we have much more of sort of a standard line battle, which, considering Khan's numbers, once again, they are going to find much more appealing. But Rohan still have reserves, they still have missile units, using fire ammunition on their Helmingast to try and break some of the Khandish advancing. Shield Maidens getting engaged in melee, not sure whether they still had ammunition, but they're up against Brotherhood of the Axe, not where they want to be. Like I said, they're decent at keeping themselves alive, but not so much against Heavy Axemen. I think they actually are out of ammunition, otherwise they wouldn't be so eager to advance onto the front line. Morale buffing effect could be very useful to keep that Rohan line alive for a little bit longer. But now Khan are starting to do the same with their javelins. Nomadic Marauders trying to do as much damage to Rohan as they can. Westmark Marshals coming onto the front line. I mean, it's still somewhat organised, which I think is to Rohan's credit. Like, at this point, when you see a front line start to bend and buckle in a fight like this, it often descends into pure pandemonium very quickly. Rohan have managed to keep their shape reasonably well. Unfortunately, they've had to sacrifice a few of their ranged units onto the front line in order to do it, which I think will ultimately be a bit of a difference maker. Westmark Marshals are shaken, or they were shaken. Brotherhood of the Spear moving forward. Unit of cavalry that was hidden, and actually a unit of very useful cavalry. Riddermark skirmishers, those javelins will be really, really handy for trying to break up some of these more elite units, and they need to deal with these Brotherhood of the Spear somehow, because they just continue to flex their muscles. More Shield Maidens. I mean, this is a unit which I don't think was out of ammunition, but they've been pressed into melee service anyway. Medicel Guard, again, it says they're reloading, so they're not out of ammunition either, but once again, they need to get into melee, otherwise the line is lost. And to be fair, Medicel Guard are very capable in melee anyway, more so than the Shield Maidens. There are the Sons of Yor, could still be the turning point for Rohan. A unit of Knights in the late game that are still in such good condition. I mean, one of them just fell there, but even so, could be absolutely vital. Shield Maidens, axes being thrown into that enormous blob, which the bodies that are piling up at this point. And considering the fact that Rohan still have somewhat of a shape, Khan should still feel fairly good about this, because Rohan's army is starting to lose steam, but Khan are probably starting to sweat a little bit. The fact that in spite of the huge pressure they put Rohan under, they still actually haven't broken them yet, which is of course a bit of a concern. More units on the way forward, and still over here Rohan hold. Khan had less over here, to be fair, and actually Rohan probably feeling pretty good about their chances over here. They've got a decent shape to their engagement. Brotherhood of the Shadows is moving forward. More Storm Guard, though, will be a concern, because quite a lot of the units on the front line over here are Eastmarks, which of course quality just isn't there. Riddermark Archers are coming across. Definitely not the heroes Rohan were hoping for in melee. And you can see, just looking back, Rohan have pretty much committed everything at this point. Khan have also pretty much committed everything, though. There's just a single unit of halberds back there, as well as a few units of archers that haven't been committed forward yet. That is more than Rohan, admittedly. And Rohan's army is already starting to buckle, so I do think Khan are going to be victorious here still. But Rohan have put up more of a fight than I thought. I thought this was a match that Rohan would actually quite struggle with, considering the compositions, considering the relative strengths of both sides. That's a big charge here. 4th Aerlingus indeed. A big charge doing a lot of damage, but I think they're going to need so much of that Rohan in order to actually be victorious in this battle. Still got quite a few Axemen back here. Westmark Marshals doing the business against the Brotherhood of the Spear. There's still some Eastmark Scouts as well. Again, good showcase. With a unit of 7, they definitely would have routed in 0.97. They're still fighting though, still kicking. Any charge they get is going to be really appreciated by Rohan, I'm sure. Javelins thrown backwards and forwards. Khan, of course, trying to use their javelins to silence the Medicel Guard. Riddermark Archers moving forward. I mean, over here in the middle, Khan are starting to push through, but even here, there's still really depleted units of Eastmark, making life a little bit more difficult for Khan than it would otherwise be. Brotherhood of the Spear completely surrounded on all sides by Medicel Guard, so they're going to be finished off. First Marshal's Bodyguard and Sons of Yor over here. Riddermark Skirmishers doing their thing, pulling out those big axes they have in melee, which, if they do get caught in melee, they probably will actually deal a bit more damage than their contemporaries here, and they're in behind enemy lines. If the Sons of Yor get in and around here and start going up and down, that could be enough to engender enough panic in Khan to actually cause some pretty serious chain routes. Riddermark skirmishers are unlikely to be able to deliver the kind of damage that will do the same. But all credit to Rohan here. Still quite a lot of Medicel Guard as well. Nurad footmen here. I mean, that's the Nurad Storm Guard. The Sons of Yall, they need to get away from the Nurad Storm Guard. They cannot afford to lose the Knights. Like, Engsvitz's Sons of Yall are Rohan's key. If they are to win this fight, it'll be because of cavalry. Helmingas coming in to try and stop the nomadic infantry. A frontal charge from the Eastmark scouts. This may be their last move, killing off a few more of the nomadic infantrymen. Riddermark archers are going to defeat the few nomadic marauders that manage to push their way through the lines. Look at this still. There's still Variag bowmen firing, and that could be another key difference. Khan have still got a bit of archer support. That's a nice charge right into the backs of those Nurad footmen. I just don't think the Rohan infantry is going to be able to keep itself alive long enough for the cavalry to deliver the blows it needs to. Still the Brotherhood of the Shadows. They've lost a bit of... you can see over here, Rohan's infantry at this point pretty much all fallen apart. There's only a couple of units of scattered Helmingas, and the nomadic infantry and all of the other Nurads should be enough to mop that up. Still a bit of a strong point here in the middle, quite a few Westmark marshals, but at this point their formation is getting collapsed on. This cavalry really needs to do the business very, very quickly. I mean, again, Shield Maidens showing their courage on the front line, morale buffing effects obviously very, very useful, but they are fighting a losing battle, and I think the window for Rohan to mount an impressive comeback here is slowly but surely closing. What have we got back here? Riddermark skirmishers pulling out those axes. There's just this one Brotherhood of the Spear. Any cavalry kill he get will be most appreciated by his brethren, I'm sure. Westmark marshals, they've been brave on the front line today as well. A lot of the times we've been looking at them, they've been fighting a losing battle, going in and out of being shaken, steady or wavering. Bit of support there from the cavalry, but their damage, I'm sure, was a concern for Khan, but in the end, they just had the manpower. Like, over here, it was risky for Khan to do that. Like, brute forcing like that in a linear direction instead of trying to spread out along the banks sooner could have cost Khan, because clearly, I mean, a lot of Khan's army lies dead in the dirt there, but I think they've managed to get away with it. They're still going to have to try and deal with this cavalry, but I think they will manage it. And this is an RP, let's not forget, so I mean, this Khandish army is going to be devastated for a little while. A nice charge from the Sons of Yall there into the nomadic infantry. They're going to take losses. A couple more of the knights fall there. And that, of course, is going to be key as the battle continues. You can see over here, Rohan finally defeated over on this side of the battlefield, pretty much. So Khan... Well, there goes the Khandish general. Sons of Yall doing the business. But all of the Rohan infantry over on this side has now been dealt with. And it won't be long before the final infantry units are also dealt with over on this side, to be fair, actually. I think there's only one left. These Medicel Guard, and that's not many of them, to be fair. They're being completely overrun by the Variag and Nurad hordes that are before them. But a brave fight from Rohan, but it was always going to be one based on composition and numbers that they think they were going to struggle with. But I think it does go to show again that their infantry is more resilient than I think people give it credit for. I think people kind of know that Khan's infantry is tanky and can be relied upon in a situation like this. I feel as though if the situations were reversed and Rohan had fairly favourable compositions in a 4v3, I feel as though they could probably win as well. Because the Nurad halberds and the phalanx is not quite the same boon that you would think it would be if you have shield maidens and the like. Khan can make it a little bit difficult for them to advance and fire, and they can try and use footmen to try and block the lion's share of the damage, but I mean, it is easier said than done. Like, it's just one of those things. Two very cavalry focused factions. I don't think wine is going to be much good to him. We just ran him through with a halberd, but no matter. First Marshal's bodyguard charging into the nomadic marauders, trying to get as many kills as possible, but of course at this point they're just trying to kill these nomads for pride before they end up falling themselves. Yeah, I mean, it's 11%, so just below the 10% difference we normally get, but I mean that could change with these charges coming in, because proportionally the kills that this Rohan cavalry is going to be able to get will probably be greater than anything else. Sons of Yore, you can see there, getting a really nice charge into the Nomadic Marauders, causing them to break. That is a bold move indeed to charge right into Halberds, but it may just be there. You can see though, a multiple HP Lancer, if they charge into a thin Phalanx unit, they can buckle it. Like, you do need to be sort of braced and have your ranks fairly deep to to take a charge head on like that. Over here, Nurad Footman, a lot of AP damage going the Sons of Yore's way. Another charge coming in there as well. So yeah, they really are doing a decent job here, and yeah, it ticks over into 10% being the difference, which is good to see. Because I think this deserves to be a close battle, to be fair, because Rohan did put up a good fight. Again, it's one of those fights where I feel as though I never once felt like the full momentum was with Rohan, but they weren't a million miles away. Difficult situation for them though. If they're in a situation like this where they have to skirmish and they can't really do so using their horse archers, it is tough for them, to be fair. It's an area where they are definitely a little bit lacking, and you can exploit them, potentially. Khand, of course, are not lacking in that area. They have good foot archers as well as good horse archers. Khand are not capable of dishing out quite the same damage as Rohan in melee, which may be why we're seeing just the carnage over here. So many dead Nurads, and a lot of that I think is down to Rohan having so many units of AP shock infantry, which of course should be more effective in the current patch. Lots of damage, lots of AP, a little bit cheaper. And obviously it's going to be something that takes its toll. They just didn't have enough of them. Just one of those things, I suppose. It would be interesting to try and build a Rohan army in this situation that would be able to counter Khand. Khan's army kind of picks itself by picking some of the more resilient units, a little bit more of a slow burn, with a few standouts like the Brotherhood of the Axe and the Storm Guard for dealing a bit of AP damage. Still riding around First Marshal's Bodyguard, charging in, taking some point blank fire from the Veriag Bowman. Players admitting defeat at this point. First Marshal's Bodyguard are gone. There goes Engsvitz's general, pulled down by a halberdier at long last. And there we go, not much left at all. 10% exactly the difference. You love to see it. Well, yeah, he did admit defeat. And that is it. Indeed, and this has salvaged my mood a little bit after engaging in another replay that crashed on me. But yeah, very nice, obviously. Got to see the hotfix in action. The main thing to take away from the hotfix was the performance of the Eastmark Scouts. In the previous patch, they would have routed after maybe 2 charges, maybe 3 at the most. This time, though, they carried on fighting pretty much to the bitter end, and that would have built up a decent amount of kills over that course of time for a very cheap unit of Lancers like themselves. And I feel as though that's a good change. It won't just help Rohan, of course, it does help many, many factions, because obviously a faction, for example, like Gondor, you know, Gondor's cavalry has really been pretty poor in recent times. Like, they have some utility, but that's pretty much it. Like, you're never going to win a game with Gondor's cavalry, really. Now, though, with their Lancers maybe not breaking quite so much, they can be used a little bit more. Not something you want to rely on too much, but it's still something else. Gives them another facet to their army. It'll definitely help out a faction like Cardlan, of course. They already have morale issues as it is, without their cavalry routing every which way as well. So it should make, particularly a unit like the Tharbad Riders, particularly dangerous, and obviously there's plenty of other examples of that as well. Dol Amroth will probably benefit from that as well, with their entry-level Lancer as well, alongside their really nice heavy cavalry in general. As for the game itself, yeah, I mean, I pretty much said everything that needs to be said, really. I think Khand approached this pretty much by the book, by their standards, and it ended up being a victory. The only thing I would say maybe slightly different was just how intent they were on going right through the middle. Not necessarily the wrong thing to do, but it will take its toll. Like, it's going to be costly, and you can only really do that with a few factions. Khand is one of them, because you can go very numbers heavy as Khand, but you do need to be careful with the morale. Khand, particularly their lower tier infantry, is not particularly resolute, and obviously Rohan knew that, because they were using fire arrows, they were charging in with shock infantry, they were using axe throwers, trying to do a lot of morale damage more so than physical damage, but in the end it just wasn't enough, and they weren't able to tip Khand into chain routing. But I do think Rohan deserve a lot of credit. I think most people would have expected Rohan to get bowled over in that sort of situation, but they held firm, they stood their ground, and honestly I don't think, if Gondor were in this situation, I think it would have been slightly closer, but I think it still would have been a loss for Gondor ultimately, who are a faction you expect to be a little bit better in this situation. Obviously Gondor, the one main advantage they could have is to maybe contest the skirmish fight a little bit better than Rohan would be able to. But ultimately, Rohan still did well with their archers because they waited. They weren't baited into a skirmish fight early, which is exactly what Khan would have wanted. Instead, they waited, were willing to take a few losses first, and ultimately the additional support from their archers was used a little bit more wisely than it otherwise would have been. But let's see what did the damage for the Khandish armies. Obviously, a lot of damage was taken, but a few units breaking 100, including the Storm Guard. Unsurprisingly, of course, very good unit. Halberds also, when they were committed. Footmen and Brotherhood of the Axe. So I think this was when they really started to come forward in extreme numbers, started to overwhelm the Rohan line. The ones that were under 100 were maybe a little bit before that, when they were taking punishment from stuff like the Helmengas and the Shield Maidens. Misericordi, Nurad Stormguard once again. I think his was the one that was actually committed and ultimately died to the Shield Maidens, but they still managed to break 100 kills. Obviously, you expect your high quality units with regards to your heavy infantry anyway to be able to do that sort of thing. Brotherhood of the Axe did very well. Very Bowman as well. So obviously in this sort of situation, when you know that your archers are going to be superior in the long, drawn-out, attrition-y skirmish fight, very Bowman doing well, cleaning up there. They may have also been completely uncontested as well, because Rohan were trying to go after the infantry, rightly so, I would say, in this situation. Death Eater, a few units breaking 100 once again. Nomadic Raiders, so the archers again doing the business. Brotherhood of the Axe and Spear, also the rest of his army struggling maybe a little bit more. Nurad Footman doing okay. And then finally, Yo Ranger, I think it's probably going to be fairly similar. Yeah, Nomadic Infantry, Archers doing okay, Raiders, Bowmen. So yeah, you can see here that I do think that the key for Khan here was really flexing their muscles with their better foot archer force, and ultimately coming forward with a lot of brute strength when the time was called for. A lot of attackers sometimes will hold too much back and allow the defenders to build up a pretty healthy kill count for themselves. Rohan was still able to do that because Rohan, of course, have got the ability to deal damage quickly. But Khan were not scared to come forward, and ultimately that was another thing which helped win them the game. So yeah, big thank you to Prince for sending this one in. I think he's actually no, I think he just pointed me towards it. I think it was on one of the Discords, and he just said, "Hey, this was a replay that I did. Could you want it?" So I went and got it myself. So yeah, big thank you to him for pointing it out for me. Big thanks to all the players involved for a nice high quality game. And obviously big thank you to the RP for continuing running, and also big thank you to the game itself for not crashing, which is always nice. And I feel as though I should probably let Sin know, probably will do so shortly after I record this, to be honest with you, that yeah, there have been some technical issues with his new maps, at least with regards to me recording them. I'm sure they're probably perfectly fine to play on. Again, just like I said, I can't remember when it was, to be honest with you, but I remember it was, I think it was that period in November, maybe early December, where I was having a lot of technical issues and it was causing me despair. It's flashing back to that, and once again I feel as though it's no coincidence that it's new maps that it's happening on. Like there's stuff that people put on new maps which is just too taxing, and again, zooming in on mangonels as they fire should not be enough to cause a crash. You know, too many rangers, sometimes it will just crash randomly on maps like that, like I said, and it has to be a feature in there, because I promise you the game should not be crashing on the settings that I'm using. My PC is fine. The game runs fine on maps like this. I was concerned this was going to crash because of like juddering frame rates when there was big blobs of infantry over there, but that's more just my paranoia coming into effect, because the last replay I tried to do was a crash. This replay was never really in any danger of crashing unless I zoomed right in when the Shield Maidens and all the archers were firing into one spot. But that's fine, like I kind of expect that, because it's unreasonable for me to expect that to happen. It is reasonable for me to expect that the game shouldn't crash just by moving around the map like this, like I'm doing now. Again, it's still a problem. I don't think there's any easy answer for it from my perspective. It's just something that I'm going to have to accept, but I feel as though it is also something I should point out, that if maps prove to be problem childs like this, I just need to blacklist them and not use them, because again, it's not worth the stress, it's not worth the aggro that it heaps upon me. Again, like I said, I only have limited free time, I only have limited time to record. I've tacked this onto the end of a long university day, and obviously crashing within the first literally 45 seconds of me do it after the army composition phase is obviously the sort of thing which is going to just completely crash my mood, and it's just not worth it to me. I want to do this with a little bit more enthusiasm than I displayed at the end of the Adunheim Outpost replay. That's what I want to avoid. But again, it's just one of those things, I suppose, and it's getting away also from the battle that was at hand here, because to be fair, all the hotfix battles we've shown so far have been of very high quality, I have to say, and long may that continue. because I think that the hotfix should once again breathe a little bit of new blood into breathing blood. That doesn't really make any sense, but it should introduce a bit of new blood into the game, both in terms of content and hopefully some players as well, which will always be good. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you will join me for whatever is next.